Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webcast. Ditch the review and ignite growth with continuous performance enablement, sponsored by Bonusly. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and type them there. A new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please be sure to complete it as soon as the webcast is ended. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Bonusly for their presentation. And David, you're not sharing your slides.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We are very excited about today's topic. It is a very hot topic right now, performance management. And I'm sure the previous webinar before this was really insightful. I know HR.com has several webinars over the course of today and tomorrow, but we are really excited just to talk about what performance enablement is, and what continuous performance enablement is, and just really how it differs from traditional performance management topics. If you all haven't been here for a Bonusly webinar before, we love to do our webinars Q&A style. So I have two of my colleagues who we'll introduce here in a second. And we have a series of questions that we'll go over just to, set the stage, talk about what performance enablement and continuous performance enablement is. And then we'll save some time at the end for some questions. And so as we're going throughout the webinar, feel free to use that Q&A box and we will get to those at the end. And without further ado, let's go ahead and meet our speakers. So my name is David. I am calling from Jacksonville, Florida. Really hot right now, so very grateful to be indoors. And I am on the marketing team here at Bonusly. If you've been to a webinar with us, you might recognize me. And I am really excited to introduce Sarah and Alessandra. And so we'll start with you, Sarah. Just share where you're calling from, what your role is here at Bonusly, and then as a little icebreaker, what is your favorite thing about the summer?
Hey everybody, my name is Sarah Weinstein. I'm based here in Nashville, Tennessee. My role at Bonusly is Director of Product Marketing. I'm going to say my favorite thing about summer is my garden. Got plenty of tomatoes and peppers going right now, so excited to make some salsa.
I am Alessandra. I do user research for Bonusly, and I was based in Broomfield, Colorado up until last week, but I just moved to Florida, which is actually where I grew up. So I think my favorite thing about the summer is a very nostalgic memory. It's just like a pub sub on the beach, a Publix sub. If you're not familiar, they're very good, way better than Subway, just like on the beach. And then you're kind of out of there by 2 p.m. where it gets too hot and you hit the AC and a nice like coolish shower. That's a very nostalgic and favorite thing about summer for me.
Absolutely. Literally what I did this weekend. And like Alessandra said, if you haven't had a Publix sub before, make sure you grab one. They are so good. And really cheap actually. So like Alessandra and Sarah both mentioned, continuous performance enablement. So this has been a really big topic here at Bonusly over, I want to say the last year really. And so really excited to have Alessandra and Sarah joining me, two just really crucial people who were involved in the research and the building of some of our new products here at Bonusly around performance management and performance enablement. And so I'm just really excited to hear what they have to share with everyone. And so before we get started, I will just share with everyone really how we at Bonusly define performance enablement and also continuous performance management. And so performance enablement is a people-centric practice that decentralizes feedback and allows employees to take ownership of their growth while empowering managers to inspire top performance. With this process, employees are enabled to learn, make mistakes, and grow in their roles through consistent, real-time feedback. Timely feedback, coupled with meaningful resources, manager-led coaching, and regular goal check-ins, equips employees to reach their full potential on their terms. And then continuous performance management is a more modern approach to employee performance measurement, evaluation, and improvement. It's a human-centric way of incorporating performance discussions into daily life at your organization, opening up lines of communication and trust between employees and managers, and creating high-performing teams where top talent can thrive. And so, I will share these definitions in the chat. Oop, going crazy here for a second. I'll share these definitions in the chat. That way you all can save them, read them, and then we'll continue to share resources throughout the webinar. But before we get started, I would love to start with one question just to really set the stage here. And we'll start with you, Alessandra, but what are some of the biggest challenges that HR professionals face when it comes to traditional performance reviews?
Yeah, and this might not be surprising given the definition you just gave, but I think one of the biggest ones is that lack of continuous feedback. With yearly reviews, employees are really left in the dark about their performance for 364 days of the year. And we're working on these projects and we're developing throughout the year, and this continuous feedback gives us the guidance that we need to pivot and make micro adjustments in the way that we do things. Versus if you're told 9 months after a project what you could have done better, that's 9 months without putting that feedback into practice and growing. And maybe you like really thought you did well, and so you kind of stuck to those methods that you used, and you find out much later that it didn't work as well as you thought it did. So yearly reviews are really missing the opportunity to identify growth areas and set goals for improvement in a way that's year-round, like continuous feedback might do. And then, as you can imagine, that might lead to things like disengagement and demotivation. When you feel like you're really being judged on something that you never had the guidance to fix, and it's based on these standardized and subjective ratings and scores, that can be quite demotivating for employees. And then you're susceptible to disengage from your work, to protect yourself from the terrible feeling that might come with these like stuffy annual reviews and feeling like you're being judged on something that you didn't have the opportunity to fix. And then when you think about some of the roles on your teams, maybe if you have an employee who's flexing in and out of their role to meet business needs, which happens more and more these days, it's really hard to give them a review with a standardized metric that might not be able to really make a fair comparison across employees in the same role that are doing different things. So that can feel very unfair. And that's not even just an employee flexing inside and outside of their role. You could have a bunch of employees in the same role doing quite similar work, but the way they approach it is different, and maybe they all get very similar results, but those performance reviews might be a bit too rigid and feel unfair to them because they have these standardized performance ratings. But all of these challenges can be addressed with like a more progressive approach to performance management that really emphasizes intrinsic motivators and employee autonomy. I think a lot of our future questions will address like how you can fix that as well. But Sarah, curious to know, like, what are your biggest challenges for performance reviews?
Yeah, I'd say one thing I want to preface is if you Google performance management or performance review, the top thing that comes up is like performance reviews are dead. So there's a general consensus that the annual performance review is dead. But when I dug into the statistics, actually, there's still 70% of companies that are doing performance reviews only annually. So it's a really high percentage, even though there's that acceptance of, hey, this doesn't work. Another thing I want to highlight is the ability for managers to have recency bias. So essentially, they're only going to remember kind of the last month of work potentially. And like Alessandra said, not your project you did 9 months ago. So something that I would encourage employees to do if they're working in that environment. I've worked at organizations that did the annual review, and everybody that reported to me, I recommended them do a win sheet. So essentially throughout the year, keeping track of those wins and things that they worked on. So when it came time for that annual review, they had something to share. So that's actually a little plug for Bonusly, something that we make really easy with our performance. Another thing that I see in my background in performance management is there's a lot of manual processes still involved in performance reviews, which causes a lot of inconsistencies. Another thing that could happen is things get lost. A manager is not going to have the same quality on their 10th review as they did for their first review. So lots of inconsistencies there. And then the last thing I want to highlight is just the lack of management training around how to conduct a performance review. So I know I've done plenty of performance reviews for direct reports in my years. I've done self-appraisals, 360 reviews. But I know personally, I could say I never had a really thorough training of how to do those trainings or reviews. So I'd say that's probably clear across the board. A lot of managers don't have training on how to do those actual reviews, how to make them successful. And that lack of training causes inconsistencies across an organization. And that's something that could be apparent to employees if one manager's doing reviews one way or interprets a question a certain way, and then other managers are taking that another route. So those are just a few things I'm seeing as far as annual reviews that leads to kind of that consensus that they're dead.
I really like how you highlighted that, once you type it into Google, I think it's really once you start typing in performance reviews, it literally, the first thing that pops up as like suggested is are dead and almost all negative things. And Sarah and I actually just went to the SHRM annual conference this past, it feels like last week, but it was 2 weeks ago. And we actually met the HR.com team. Really awesome to meet everyone in person, but really that was a huge theme that we saw throughout our time there. I mean, as Sarah mentioned, we just released some new performance management features and products here at Bonusly. And so really was a large chunk of our talk at SHRM. And really the feeling is universal. I mean, everyone knows, like Sarah said, that performance reviews aren't working. A lot of companies don't really know what to do instead, and so they just keep doing them. And so really excited to dive into what some other alternatives are. And so we'll start with you, Alessandra. So how can continuous performance enablement help you better support employees' development and empower employees to take ownership of their success?
Yeah, I think focusing on growth and not judgment. You can do that by employing these regular feedback loops, setting goals as a partnership, and focusing on employee development. So regular feedback loops can be done through check-ins, coaching sessions, and informal discussions along the way. And that really allows employees to course correct and develop their skills year round. It doesn't have to be a formal conversation where you're sitting down and talking about performance. And in fact, that might give some employees anxiety. So just having those like one-to-ones with your manager and then having the opportunity to take some time to talk about your performance and your development can help give employees some ownership of their success. You can also set goals as a partnership. And I really love this one. And what that means is that employees and managers are collaborating to define the goals that they set for the company and for themselves at the company. And they're aligned with both the individual's personal aspirations and the company's objectives. So that really creates a sense of ownership on achieving these goals because the employee knows that it aligns with like their personal goals and what they want to do with their career. And then you're starting to leverage this intrinsic motivation of employees to achieve them. They do it because they want to, they're genuinely interested in it, and that helps create that. And you'll hear me talk about intrinsic motivators often, as it's one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, motivator for people. Intrinsic motivators are the things that we do because we want to, not because we're getting a paycheck, not because we have an OKR to hit, or because we have a boss that we really want to impress. It's the things that like kind of are baked into us where we have these deep curiosities and we really want to know what happens next. And so we do it. And you can really empower and leverage like the intrinsic motivation through performance enablement to help employees take ownership of their success by aligning those goals to the company vision and mission and focusing on like mastery of skills and shifting away from extrinsic rewards. And an example of like an extrinsic reward that might not work is when you provide raises solely based on these subjective performance ratings. And instead of that, you could create a more holistic compensation plan and definitely base that on the whole employee rather than did they just hit these specific standardized items on my list. So this idea of continuous performance enablement really helps you get your employees involved in what their performance means. And that in turn naturally gives them more ownership over their success and more autonomy and agency to do the things that they feel they want to do and also are good for the company. So you get a lot of alignment there.
I just want to call out a few of the things on the screen here. So I dropped it in the chat, the link to this blog post, which we'll share afterwards with everyone. But just for the benefits really that we see in continuous performance management. And I think really number 4 is one of the most important and the strongest. Just that creating a growth mindset, because like Alessandra and Sarah both mentioned, with continuous performance management, it's not this once a year, once every 6 months kind of conversation, but it's this ongoing, regular conversation you have with your direct reports, with your managers. And really just this feedback and growth and development really becomes second nature, instead of this anxiety driven, all right, here's our hour-long, once a year discussion on everything you've done this year. And so really would encourage everyone to check out that blog post. Again, we'll share it after this. But Alessandra, you mentioned a few things about OKRs, intrinsic motivators. And so performance management, the continuous performance management, really, impacts a lot of other areas. And so how can this, be integrated with some other HR initiatives such as talent development and succession planning?
Yeah. With talent development, I think you can identify skill gaps like in real time and use that like identification for training and upskilling opportunities in the moment, right? So again, that idea of like if you're doing this year round, you really know in that moment. So for example, if you have somebody who needs to develop a certain skill and you have somebody else on your team who does really well with that skill, you can partner them on a project knowing that they have those skills that they want to learn from each other. And there's different methods to do this, but I've heard one of the things I've heard that I really like is the idea of a skill matrix, where each employee has kind of a matrices of like their skills and what they're really good at, and also their areas for improvement. And so then when you go into a project, maybe you partner somebody who has a really strong research like skill with somebody who really wants to develop that skill. And then the person who's good at research maybe has a little bit less experience in like design, and you partner that person with somebody who like has a really strong design skill but maybe wants to develop their user research skill, and then you're able to kind of learn from each other along the way, and that's like a really great opportunity to learn from your fellow employees as well. But as like HR and as managers, you can also use like these moments to identify that skill gap to create more personalized learning plans, and in like essence, more personalized ways to measure the impact of learning as you like allow yourself the like ways to iterate on how you train your employees. So then you can use all of kind of these pieces of data that you have. It's like ongoing performance data to understand who has strong performance, who's exceeding expectations, who shows a really high leadership potential and capability. And then you start priming those candidates for any future opportunities that may arise within your company because of somebody leaving, or maybe you're opening up some roles. And then a little bit like less directly on like succession planning, you can still do this personalized career pathing for most employees, and that allows managers to create these career paths for high potential employees that fosters their engagement and their loyalty to the company along the way, because you're really leveraging the things that they want to do within your org and keeping their talents within, and that kind of helps you retain them as well.
And I'd add in there, kind of switching gears, something that I'm seeing that HR is really focused on as far as an initiative is consolidation of systems, specifically HR systems. So I definitely think that if you're looking to implement something with continuous performance enablement, you want to make sure that it integrates and talks with your other systems, specifically your HRS and or your payroll system. The more, and I'm sure you can relate to this, the more logins that you give employees to access, the more trouble they have getting into those systems. And also, if you're doing continuous performance enablement, you want them to be logging into that system on a regular basis. So it needs to be a system that employees are used to using and using for other functions of HR, not just the annual performance review. So I wanted to highlight that initiative. I'd also say that retention is important to a lot of employers right now, as well as recruitment. So there's definitely a tie there. I'd say when I was looking into this, I saw that 45% of more, according to Built-in, are of employees are more likely to stay in their role if they receive training. I know I do a lot of interviews, and if somebody's looking for a new role, especially if they're maybe earlier in their career, a lot of them have cited that the lack of training and continuous feedback or ability to grow in their role is a big factor, even if they've only been in their role for a year or two. But if they're not getting that continuous feedback and performance and development, they're going to be looking for an organization that's going to give that to them. I'd also say on the kind of the flip side of that performance enablement also helps with recruitment. A lot of people cite that when they're looking for a new job, especially millennials, that learning and growing are a really important factor in that. So I know I've specifically had candidates ask, what kind of training and development do you offer? How often are performance reviews? How often am I going to get to talk to my manager? And those are all things that really tie into other initiatives, but directly impact performance enablement as well.
I really like how you mentioned, like combining multiple tools into one, because it is so true. If we want this continuous loop, this continuous like feedback cycle, it has to be something that employees are used to using and also want to use. And so again, shameless bonusly plug, but just love how in our platform, it's something that employees use multiple times a day, and then now with our new features, adding in the performance management pieces, it just becomes this really holistic and easy to use system to really just capture all that employee's been working on, but also keep track of it. Because like you mentioned, you used to have an Excel sheet for this, a Google Doc for this, 3 tools for something else. And so really combining everything into an easy to use and just a really more holistic piece is, I think, crucial. And so Sarah, we'll stick with you for this next question. But what are some obstacles? I mean, it's not an easy switch to flip, just, okay, we're going to start this. And so what are some of the biggest obstacles that HR leaders and those listening may face once they start implementing continuous performance management?
I'm going to say the biggest one is manager buy-in. And what I mean by that is making managers aware and confident in the value of having those continuous feedback conversations. So whether it's one-on-ones that you're implementing, making sure that those are actually happening, that they're happening at a consistent quality, that managers feel comfortable with it. That's a big thing as well, is just making sure that they've got the training to have those conversations. I also find that a lot of organizations aren't measuring those continuous feedback conversations. That might be because they don't have a formal system of tracking that. But I think it's very valuable for HR to be that quality assurance to make sure that those conversations are happening. So training managers to make sure that they feel comfortable having those conversations, to having a formal system where they're able to measure that those conversations are happening on a regular basis. I know personally, I've worked at, I think everywhere that I've ever worked, we're supposed to have one-on-ones, but I've been in several organizations, I'm not Bonusly, where my one-on-ones didn't happen on a regular basis. My first job out of college, I would like go upstairs to this office and sit there, and my manager would never show up for our one-on-ones. So I think that's a pretty common occurrence at organizations. And of course, HR at that organization had no way of knowing that my one-on-one meeting wasn't happening. And that really just ties back into the importance of buy-in. I'd also say kind of secondary one is obviously if feedback is uncomfortable. So making it part of your organization's culture that, hey, feedback isn't fun to give or receive, but here's the reason why we're giving you feedback. And being comfortable with having those conversations, making it a normal part of your culture. I've seen organizations add that to their employee handbook to just kind of set the stage that like, hey, this is how we're going to use your one-on-one time. The expectation is for you to seek out feedback, whether that's from your manager or from your peers. Alessandra, what would you add?
Yeah, I think the first step is that manager buy-in. I definitely agree with that. And then like once you get that, I think the biggest challenge is the time commitment. So it takes like a big time commitment for managers to provide that ongoing feedback and the coaching. And then the org would have to adjust your workloads and maybe provide training and just have all these different strategies to make sure that effective coaching techniques are being learned and used by managers. and then that the managers can handle the change and execute it in a way that really works for employees as well. You know, it would suck to kind of revamp your whole, you know, culture around performance management, and managers, you know, maybe they buy into it, but they don't have the time to do it effectively. And then employees actually feel like they're being let down by their manager, and like their manager's not actually there to help them grow. And that can cause this loop of disengagement and distrust. And then you definitely don't want to get into that. So the time commitment that it would take for every manager to really get to know their employees in a way that allows them to facilitate this type of performance enablement is really important. And then when you think about that, the next logical challenge is scalability, right? Because it's a challenge to provide a system for consistent but also personalized feedback and development opportunities. And that itself is maybe a little bit counterintuitive, to have like a system for something that's incredibly personalized. So each org would have to find a balance that works for them between standardization and flexibility to cater to those different needs of different employees, different departments. A sales team is going to be very different from a product team in the way that you want to conduct this performance enablement and performance management. And then all of these kind of boil up to a challenge of like choosing the right tool, right? Like, do you have something that's consistent that people can use across different departments that helps support the system that you have in place? So that's like facilitating feedback exchange, setting goals, tracking progress along the way. And does it do other things as well? So you can minimize the amount of logins that your employees have, because as Sarah said, the more you have, the harder it gets. So they all kind of boil up into this, but definitely starts with getting that buy-in and making sure that you structure the org where people have the time to make it a priority to shift to performance enablement.
I really like how you both mentioned managers. I mean, I think really this year it's become really such a big topic, whether it be manager burnout and how crucial and how really big of an issue it is right now, all the way up to manager training. You know, a lot of managers aren't getting the training that they need or that they want. And so this is a perfect segue into the next question. And we'll start with you, Alessandra. But with this system, you know, how can HR support and train managers on employee performance?
I'm muted. Yeah. So I think initial and ongoing training is the very basic, right? You want to equip your managers with the skills that they need to deliver effective and ongoing feedback, to have those meaningful career conversations where you're linking the company goals and the employee goals, and to really guide employee development in a way that's personalized for each employee. So you're going to want to train them on how to do that, because for some people, it definitely doesn't come naturally. I would say probably to most. And then when you find a way that works for your org, you'll want to train them on the more logistical things, right? So your tooling, if you're using any, how to set goals and have them roll up to the org mission and track the progress of those goals so that you still have visibility into like the business needs and what's going on there. And then you really want to like train them on how to document anything that might need to be documented. So we know when it comes to performance, sometimes you have to document those conversations around having low performance. And that can be a challenge if you're using this new like continuous feedback system where you have many, many data points over time, because you're not just doing it once a year, you're doing it all year. So learning how to logistically use that data that you have and where you might document things and make sure that HR is up to date. And then you'll also want to train on bias awareness and educate managers on unconscious bias or recency bias or any type of bias that they might have. And also the most important thing, the strategies to mitigate that bias, so that they can provide these really fair and objective assessments for their employees. And then all of this helps you build a culture of continuous learning and continuous performance management. But to maintain that, you really have to have that leadership buy-in. It sets the tone for the org, it encourages manager participation. And when the leadership is doing it, they're really setting the example of what to do. And then you really want to recognize and reward those who are effectively implementing these strategies, because you're reinforcing those behaviors positive consequences always work better than negative consequences. So you want to reinforce people that are doing the behaviors correctly, the way that you want them done. And it also shows on behalf of the org a commitment to employee development on behalf of the company. So you're really showing like what you value by rewarding those who are doing it really well. What about you, Sarah? What are some things you're thinking here?
I've got a big list, so I'll try to keep it concise. One big one, I think, if you don't have this, is having documentation and having a manager manual. And a manager manual should have everything from how to hire an employee, how to fire an employee, how to have those performance conversations, how to use your tools. It's not just helpful for a new manager to have access to that, but it's guaranteeing consistency across your organization and making sure that managers have somewhere to go to make sure that they're following kind of those best practices that HR puts in place. So if you don't have a manager manual, I'd say start there and kind of map out and outline kind of the components of that, the regular things that managers are asking you for from HR. That's also going to save you time in the long run. Chances are you've probably got a lot of documentation in different places potentially, but combining all of those into a manual for managers so they know exactly how to have those conversations is one thing. I'd also say regular manager training and regular manager meetings. That could be, I've seen things such as like office hours with HR, where managers can pop in or pick the brains of other managers as far as how to have tough conversations. I've also had a lot of success personally with role-playing tough conversations. So I've had manager training where essentially given kind of different feedback scenarios of so common things that you might want to give an employee feedback on, and then being able to actually practice having that conversation live with another individual and see how somebody might respond. I found that those role plays can also turn out to be pretty fun. But it also prepares you for like the worst case scenario as a manager. Chances are your conversation isn't going to go that way. But I found that having managers prepared for the worst case really helps them feel confident and have really efficient performance and feedback conversations in the moment. If they've kind of role played how they want to have that conversation and feel confident, kind of rolling with the punches in those conversations. I've also seen kind of required training for managers, especially new managers. A few kind of personal favorites of mine are the book Coaching for Improved Work Performance and Radical Candor. Both of those touch on kind of coaching and having tough conversations with employees. And Coaching for Improved Work Performance specifically has a really great kind of flowchart and methodology to how to have kind of neutral feedback conversations, positive feedback conversations, and how to kind of rate how the severity of where that conversation should go. So I'd recommend those books for new managers or people that want to improve their coaching. And then kind of lastly, I would say making sure that HR is acting as the quality assurance for feedback in your organization. Not saying that you need to be involved in every conversation of feedback specifically, but having access to know that managers are having those conversations. So that could be in your performance management tool, making sure that one-on-ones are regularly happening, that they're happening with the quality that you want, that the content's consistent. Something that I've seen work is just having kind of quarterly check-in with managers, asking how their team's doing, taking a look at kind of the cadence of their one-on-ones and the content, and making sure that there's just that accountability there. And I saw there was a question of what are those books again? I'll drop the links to both of those, but they're Coaching for Improved Work Performance and then Radical Candor. So I'll drop those books in the chat.
I will say these questions are unprompted, so I have no idea what the speakers are going to say. And I laugh almost every time. We do a webinar about a week here at Bonusly, and the book Radical Candor, without a fault, always comes up. And so highly recommend it. We get it in onboarding here at Bonusly. But when Sarah mentioned that, I just had to smile. I promise you it comes up every single webinar, no matter who is speaking. And so, yes, Sarah, thanks for dropping those in the chat. I saw someone ask in the Q&A also. But as Sarah drops those in there, feedback has been a massive topic starting last year as well. We started talking about it in our webinars, and it really was just like a really interesting topic, and so many questions came up about it. And so we've done a couple webinars this year around the topic of feedback, how to give it, how to receive it. And so would highly recommend going to our website, checking out those webinars. We have 2 different ones, both with different panels, just really informational. And I feel like we could have gone on for hours around the topic. And so, as you may have known, we've talked about feedback quite a bit in this webinar. And we'll start with you, Sarah, with this one. But can you elaborate on some specific ways that frequent feedback within continuous performance enablement really helps foster this employee ownership of their success?
Yeah, I'd say first off, an employee can't improve if they don't know what they're doing wrong. And oftentimes I've seen managers will kind of wait until something boils up before they say something. But it's a lot easier to say something like neutral in the moment early on. So coaching managers on that, having maybe it's an employee's constantly late for meetings. It could be starting with like some neutral feedback of, hey, I noticed that you're always late for meetings. Is there anything that I can do to help you, attend meetings on time? Or what are you doing to try to attend meetings on time? And it could be as simple as like letting the employee know that they can turn on notifications to attend their meetings on time. And that is a lot easier conversation to have than waiting for something to boil up. Where an employee potentially misses or is really late to an important presentation or meeting. So I'd say first, making sure that your managers feel comfortable having those conversations. I know I've asked managers before if they're kind of complaining about an employee's performance, like, hey, have you told them that? And a lot of times the answer is like, well, no, I haven't had a direct conversation on that. And that's really just setting the employee up for failure. It's leaving the manager frustrated. And really, it's not allowing the employee to own their part of improving if they don't know that that's an issue. So I'd say just creating that culture and training your managers to have kind of those quick conversations where really to the employee, it's not going to even feel like a serious feedback conversation in the moment, first waiting for something to blow up. And then lastly, I'd say just fixing those issues before it becomes a big problem, like I said. Alessandra, what would you add on?
Yeah, I think I couldn't say it better than you. That increased transparency and clarity that comes with giving continuous feedback is so important to help employees understand where they are and what they need to do next. I think it can also really empower this like self-directed employee growth when you're really empowering employees to have a sense of agency and control in their careers, and it motivates them to kind of take the reins and identify any resources or trainings or anything else that they might do to address the skill gaps that they have. But again, they don't know those skill gaps unless they're pointed out, right? Like we don't work in vacuums and we are also doing our best. So unless we're told that we can do something better, then we don't really know that it's an opportunity. I think on here, we also see strength and connections. This is really important, I think. When you're giving people candid feedback and you're giving it continuously, you're really strengthening those connections because you're saying like, hey, I trust you enough to like say what you can do to improve, and I hope you trust me enough to know that I'm saying this in your best interest. And it kind of plays into that psychological safety as well, because if you're recognized for what you're doing well and you have those positive consequences, that's also a form of feedback, is knowing what you can do, what you are doing well, so that you can continue doing it. But it also makes you feel safe to like get the opportunities for improvement, and once you have that connection, you're able to have those really candid conversations. I was doing research once around feedback, and somebody told me that they use the first 30 days of an employees like employment to get to know the employee, 60 days to get to know how they work, and 90 days to begin to understand how they'll work together. And then you're really building that connection in that time. So when your 90 days come around, you can start giving that candid feedback of like, I've noticed you do this. Can you talk me through your process in that? Here's what I think would help us work together even better. And you have that connection so that you can, iterate on how you work together. and make things better together. But that's not really possible if you're withholding feedback and you're only doing it once a year. Then employees will feel like that once a year is kind of an attack on them. And again, like you didn't know all year. So being able to do it continuously can have like a multiplier effect on performance, because people feel engaged and empowered to change the ways that they do things and are able to iterate on the way that they work, which is something that we all do, so that they can get to their like peak performance and really hit that high performing mark of their own. And they're able to do that with like a sense of trust and security with those people around them, because they know that they care enough to want them to develop and grow into an even better person and even better at their craft.
Again, I want to call out just a couple things on this slide. I dropped the link to this blog post in the chat, but really just some of the benefits of this consistent feedback. And I think a lot of times when we think of feedback, it's often, constructive or sometimes negative. But, here at Bonusly, we really view, recognition as a form of positive feedback. If you are regularly being recognized for what you're doing well, that is absolutely a form of feedback. And so Gallup actually recently did a study, which you'll see here in this first part, which is employees are 3.6 times more likely to agree that they're motivated to do outstanding work when their manager provides daily feedback. And then, as Alessandra mentioned, with psychological safety, when employees are regularly recognized for their contributions and reminded of their value, they feel safer to take risks and learn from mistakes. And really that just goes into the manager check-ins and one-on-ones. Once they feel like they have that psychologically safe space to, give feedback, receive feedback, give and take mistakes, it really is this like snowball effect that happens. And so really glad that you mentioned that, Alessandra. So we have one more question, and we'll start with you here, Alessandra. But ultimately, with performance management, performance enablement, continuous performance enablement, any of this, the ultimate goal really is employee performance. And so, Alessandra, we'll start with you. What are some indirect ways to influence employee performance?
Yeah, absolutely. They're easier than you think they are, I think, and they're funner than you think they are. First and foremost, I'd say investing in your work culture. If you have the type of work culture where you have clear and strong values, you have a strong sense of purpose, your employees understand how their work contributes to a larger mission, they feel more connected and invested in their performance, right? I know how I play a part in this like big, thing happening around me. The larger your company gets, the more you might get lost within the other people in the ranks. And you want to really connect to that so that they feel invested in their performance, because they feel invested in how their performance affects the company. I think recognizing and appreciating the employee contributions that they give are really like important, huge part of work cultures. Recognizing and appreciating employees boosts morale, it motivates employees, it provides employees with affirmation on their capabilities and their competencies in their roles. And that really plays into this idea of the ways people feel like motivated as humans, and being able to be confirmed in our competencies means that we're more likely to be engaged, to want to continue to develop, and continue to perform at that high level. If I know I do something really well, I want to keep doing it really well. And then you should also focus on employee well-being, because we can't pour from an empty cup. A culture that promotes healthy work-life balance with things like flexible work arrangements, paid time off, programs to help employees manage their stress, and so on, those are all important because they encourage and they facilitate these well-rested and happier employees, which are more likely to be engaged and productive. So the happier you are in personal life, the more of yourself you can bring to your work life, and that increases your performance. And then if you're a company where you have a focus on development, which you likely are, providing that professional development opportunity, learning resources, anything to really help employees grow in their skills and advance their careers really demonstrates the company's investment in employee growth. And as Sarah said, this is like a really important thing when people are considering their jobs, whether they're going to stay or whether they're going to join a company, is that employee development. So you want to make sure that you have some programs in place where you're able to provide resources for your employees who do want to grow. And then finally, you really want to foster a culture where people are collaborative, they're working as a team, they feel empowered to contribute to the mission of the org, they feel connected to their teammates, and they feel like they have a sense of solidarity with them. And then you can do this in different ways, but like one of the ones that I love that really helps people feel in like engaged and invested in the company is encouraging feedback and ideas so that employees can be involved in the decision-making process and feel like they have a say in the future of the company. And then they again like feel like they're represented in that direction of the company, and they're more likely to hit their high performance because they really want to be a part of that growth. If they don't agree with the mission of the company or the values of the company, they're less likely to feel intrinsically motivated to really hit that high performance. And then I think like just providing those opportunities for team building, internal recognition programs like Bonusly, all of that kind of fosters this team mentality and creates that sense of bonding between employees and a sense of solidarity between employees as well. And that creates that team mentality, which is really beneficial to companies. Sarah, what are some ways you've known to influence employee performance?
Yeah, I think it ties into the way that I see the employee and employer relationship. And really, I kind of relate that to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. From us, if you've ever taken a psychology class, that was my minor. But at a basic level, an employee's basic needs need to be met by the employer. So that's things like offering a competitive salary and benefits. If they're a working parent, maybe it's flexibility to take care of their family or their children. And then from a safety standpoint, the work environment is also really important. So an employee needs to feel that their job and work environment is safe and secure and comfortable. I've really seen in work situations where something really that could seem small to leadership potentially is a really kind of harmful or deter to employees. Could be things like, really poor parking. I've heard of people having like a lack of working air conditioning in their work environments or non-working bathrooms. And not having kind of that baseline of safety in their work environment makes it really hard for them to perform at a high level if those kind of basic needs aren't being met. And then once kind of those tangible things as far as benefits, safety, work environment are met, then an employee is able to really start performing at their highest. It's moving into those intangibles of feeling a sense of belonging on their team. They're able to see the importance and the impact of their work. And really, they're able to reach self-actualization because all those basics are met. And they're really feeling a sense of belonging at your organization and feel like they're making valuable contributions. So if you've never thought about the employer-employee relationship in this way, I'd encourage you to kind of do an audit and make sure kind of those basic needs of your organization and your workforce is being met. So you're really enabling employees to perform at their highest level because they are feeling that sense of belonging, that sense of contribution.
I love it. And I know Alessandra mentions this Maslow's hierarchy of needs very often in our webinars. And so I'm sure she was very happy that you mentioned it. But really beneficial stuff. Thank you both so much for sharing with us all, your thoughts around continuous performance management, performance enablement. And we're going to launch a quick poll before we get into the Q&A. But like we've mentioned a few times throughout here, Bonusly really is in the business of connecting people, whether that be to each other, to the company, or to their managers. And so seeing how all of this really ties in to build on the performance of the employees and enable this high performance. And so we would love to show you some of our new products, our new features. And so if you are interested at all, just go ahead and answer this poll and we will have someone reach out to you give you a personalized demo, see how Bonusly can help your organization, whether it be with rewards and recognition, performance enablement, just regular awards for your company, automating them. So answer that poll and we will have someone reach out to you. And we do have time, I think, for one question. And so I'll go ahead and ask it, and then Sarah, Alessandra, whoever wants to jump in, feel free to. And we'll leave that poll up while we do this last question. But how can continuous performance enablement help employees set more effective goals that are aligned with their personal and professional growth?
Yeah, I'd be happy to hop in here. So I really think this idea of like collaborative goal setting is a really important start. It shifts the process from being dictated by managers in the org to being a conversation that's had together, and employees can really voice their aspirations and their career goals so that you can tie them in together. I can use myself as an example here. I'm an anthropologist by training, and I'm really intrinsically motivated to understand people, the way they think, and how their culture and their experiences influence their perceptions of the world around them. But I'm also a user researcher, and often that job description entails doing projects like usability testing, where you really leverage kind of the same skills to do the research. But it's a lot more boxed into the scope of how people interact with the product. And at Bonusly, in addition to the usual testing and the traditional testing you might do in user experience research, I've also been able to do broader research projects that go beyond the usability of a product and ask questions like, what does appreciation mean at work? And in that research, we really outlined, in the appreciation research, we really outlined how employees feel appreciated at work. And we discovered that through their values aligning with the goals of the company and their connections to their peers at work and their ability to grow at work, they feel appreciated. And all this research has helped inform our teams as Bonusly expands into the performance enablement space. So as we take like a very holistic approach to enabling performance, it's an approach based on theories of human motivation and the way we work as humans. And we're able to build a product that has a great end user experience because of this deeper research. So I'm always grateful for Bonusly for giving me those opportunities because I genuinely love it. I find myself lost in the research, and then sharing it out makes me really excited. And that makes me say I love my job. And I think every year fewer and fewer people can say that they love their job, but this is definitely something that leverages like my personal goals and my personal desires with the goals of the company. And that's a beautiful like marrying of things there.
Well said. The only thing that I'd add as somebody that's both like personally and professionally very into goal setting would be that it's commonly just accepting that having a regular review of your goals helps you achieve them. So having those regular one-on-ones where those goals are top of mind every week. It doesn't mean that they need to be potentially talked about every week, but if there's progress towards that goal, so I'd say encouraging your managers to have that list of goals, to be regularly reviewing it with people, and then being able to adjust and have conversations if an employee needs help or they need to adjust a goal. And, you know, depending on the kind of comfortability of your manager, that could be having some personal goals in there too, that maybe their job is helping them accomplish, whether it's, you know, somebody that's earning commission that wants to buy a house. Being able to have that kind of transparency across your organization of how what your employees' goals are and how you're helping them achieve them is really important in that relationship as well.
Very well said. Well, that was the only other question we had. Alessandra, I see you answered that one in the chat, so thank you. But I did go ahead and drop our LinkedIns in the chat. If there's anything you will have any questions on or any follow-ups from this webinar, we would love to connect, love to talk about Bonusly and the benefits that we see in it. So feel free either scan the QR code on the screen or go ahead and in the chat, I dropped the links. But as always with HR.com, it has been such a great time. I'm always astounded at how fast the 55 minutes go. And so just want to thank you all so much for having us, and I will pass it back over to Hester.
I'd like to thank our presenters as well as all of you for joining us today. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording will be available on the HR.com website within 24 hours. The webcast credit will show in your HR.com account within 2 business days, and we'll also send you an email with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Hester.